Sunday mornings once embodied tranquility. Not joy, not a thrill, only a tranquil, unwavering calm. The sort that seeps into your very essence, much like tepid water. I stood before the mirror, clad only in my underwear, as the sunlight painted delicate lines across my bare thighs. I regarded my reflection not with admiration, but with a sense of detached curiosity. I appeared quite striking. I was well aware of my own allure. Imperfect, the years that once were have now been polished and transformed. Regulated. A beauty that demands dedication and toil. I consistently put forth the effort, even if no one truly seemed to care any longer. He was downstairs, likely perusing the newspaper as he did every Sunday. He sipped his black coffee, sweetened with an excess of sugar, finding solace in the familiar rhythm of his daily routine that kept him grounded. He always remembered to inquire about the quality of my sleep. Yet, he never cast a glance in my direction when he did. His voice drifted from the kitchen, familiar and courteous, and I responded instinctively. Not love. We had shared enough years to abandon the charade of being soulmates, yet the memory of longing for a gentle touch still lingered in my mind. With a firm hand. With fervor. It was difficult to remember the last occasion when his hands had sought me out with such fervor. Recently, his caresses seemed to stem from routine rather than desire. He felt no chill, simply impartial, secure, excessively cautious. At work, a dull haze enveloped everything, textiles, surfaces, dialogues. Until the evening of Friday. I lingered into the evening to complete the quarterly reports. He rapped once and stepped inside without hesitation, a behavior characteristic of his nature. He strolled through the space with an air of ownership, exuding confidence without a hint of arrogance. Recently grounded, unyielding. He requested my signature on a procurement form, his fingers grazing mine as he passed me the pen. It was not done on purpose. Perhaps it was. Yet, in that fleeting moment, a spark ignited, one that my body acknowledged long before my mind could catch up. My hand quivered ever so slightly as I put pen to paper. Regret washes over me as I recall how I hesitated, holding onto the clipboard for just a heartbeat longer than necessary. That evening, nestled next to my husband, his back radiating warmth and a sense of quiet protection, I shut my eyes and revisited the sensation of a stranger's fingers grazing my skin. My chest rose with a shallow breath, and I reassured myself that it was nothing, unchanging. A flutter of anxiety courses through me. The chill, yet I was aware of the truth. The jolt of feeling was undeniable. And even more dire, it pulsated with life. The following morning, I adorned my lips with lipstick before heading to work. It is not red, merely a subdued shade of brick. Sufficient to sense a change. Sufficient to determine whether he would take note. He didn't approach my desk that day, yet I noticed him observing me in the glass reflection of the office window. He gazed for an extended moment, and when I turned, his eyes remained fixed on me. A mere glimmer of an elusive essence. Curiosity? Ownership? Whatever it was, it sent a jolt through my spine and set my pulse racing. My husband inquired whether I would like to visit the lake house next weekend. It has the potential to be quite pleasant. Escape the clamor that surrounds you, he remarked as he swirled honey into his tea. I inclined my head in agreement. I found no reason to dissent. There was an absence of sensation within me. No battle ensued. There is no room for monotony. Free of bitterness. It was the same tepid water, yet now I found myself gradually submerging into its depths. Later that evening, I found myself in the walk-in closet, gazing at my clothes as if they were the possessions of a stranger. Blouses fastened all the way to the collar. Stretchable jeans. Elegant dresses that remain impeccably smooth. I traced my fingers over a black lace camisole that had remained untouched for years before finally pulling it out. It still fits perfectly. It continued to evoke a feeling within me. Unremarkable. Apparent. I found myself awake for hours, not due to guilt, but rather a swirling fog of confusion. What prompts this moment? What is it about him? What is it that I am truly seeking? It is not love, not a spectacle. Perhaps it is simply that instant of being acknowledged without the need for elaboration. That fleeting look through the office window that transformed me from a mere fixture into a hidden secret. As I shut my eyes, I envisioned his hand gently grazing against mine once more. This time, however, he pressed on without hesitation. Yet, I remained unyielding. I embraced it fully, merely a touch. Sufficiently ample. The soft hum of my phone resonated against the nightstand in the stillness of the night. An email from him, arriving later than expected. What should the subject line be? I appreciate your willingness to stay late once more. No body text. There is no signature. Yet, I found myself gazing at it for a full 10 minutes before finally deciding to switch off the screen. I chose not to respond, not at this moment. I informed my husband that the invitation arrived at the 11th hour. The conference lasted merely a single day upstate, hardly justifying the effort of packing. He offered a smile, the head inclined slightly in acknowledgement, instructed me to grab the reliable charger, and reminded me not to overlook the Tylenol. There are no inquiries. There is no doubt. Only a steadfast glow of unwavering support. That was the issue at hand. His trust in me ran so deep, so unwavering, that it transformed into a palpable void. Confidence that stifled wonder. In the stillness fostered by his trust, another presence started to awaken. I carefully folded the black camisole into my bag. It was tucked away among white blouses and neutral slacks, a secret lingering without a destination. My intentions were not set in motion. That is precisely what I conveyed to myself. Yet, I went ahead and packed it regardless. The journey by train to the conference unfolded without incident. He settled next to me, laptop aglow, his gaze flitting over spreadsheets and emails. I maintained my eyes shut, yet his presence beside me was palpable, not in the way you sense the warmth of another's body, but in the way you perceive the weight of their focus. Concentrate with the intensity of sunlight filtered through a magnifying lens. It lacked any semblance of romance. It lacked even the faintest hint of flirtation. It possessed an essence that was cooler, sharper, and undeniably more perilous. It was as though he sensed my inner trial, patiently biding his time for the outcome. At the hotel, a sense of bewilderment lingered at the front desk. Just a single room? The receptionist inquired, her eyes flickering over the screen. He chose not to correct her. Not at this moment. She momentarily halted her movements and cast a fleeting look in my direction. Not with panic, but with a sense of humor. My heart stumbled within my chest. He mentioned that he would handle it and then stepped aside to make a phone call. I lingered, feigning interest in my phone, acutely conscious of the way my legs appeared in heels and the unexpected warmth enveloping the lobby. We found ourselves in separate rooms. Certainly, we did. As the evening wore on, following the conclusion of the final panel and the clearing of the buffet trays, we found ourselves lingering by the bar. Others have been excluded. He extended a kind offer to escort me to my room. I agreed. Silence enveloped us in the elevator. The stillness seemed deliberate. The rhythm of my heartbeat resonated in the very tips of my fingers. As the doors swung open, I stepped forward, yet I refrained from swiping my key. I lingered in anticipation. Transformed. I ought to get some sleep, I remarked. Yet, even I found it hard to trust my own words. His hand rose gradually, brushing against my cheek as if seeking an answer. I remained unperturbed. Not a single blink. I simply allowed it to unfold. The kiss unfolded with a gentle, unhurried grace. It was measured, intentional, akin to savoring a long-desired indulgence, shrouded in uncertainty of whether it would be permitted. His lips brushed against mine with a deliberate slowness, steadfast yet wary, as if he were probing the boundaries of the present. I responded to him with silence. Inhaled deeply, with a subtle inclination of my head that conveyed a desire for more. The wall pressed against my back as I stood beside the hotel door. With a gentle thud, one of my heels slipped away. His hand glided along my arm. Free from possessiveness. gentle, absolutely certain. I allowed myself to lean into him, not to tumble, but to truly experience the moment. Each point of contact between our bodies whispered tales that my marriage had long since neglected to share. And then I withdrew. Not in disgrace. Not out of desire. Yet it was a necessity. My hand rested gently on his chest, and we lingered in that moment, our foreheads nearly brushing, our breaths unsteady. I ought to take my leave, I murmured. Not for him. For my own reflection. He withdrew a pace, uttered not a word. She gazed at me for a lingering moment before pivoting and making her way to the elevator. I entered the room, perched on the edge of the bed, and gazed down at the floor where my heels remained abandoned. I held back my tears. I refrained from smiling. I felt neither triumphant nor guilty. I experienced a profound sense of presence. For the first time in ages, I sensed my presence within my body rather than hovering above it. I stood beneath the cascade, enveloped in quietude, observing the droplets gather in delicate streams along my collarbone, mapping the contours of skin that had remained untouched by his hand. My fingers lingered at my lips, recalling the weight of his touch. I donned the camisole as I prepared for slumber. It seemed fitting. The dawn following the conference cast an air of strangeness over the city. Streets teeming with activity yet curiously muted to my senses, as if I had entered a realm suspended between two existences, feeling an unsettling disconnection from both. We traveled back on the train, each of us seated separately, lost in our laptops, yet neither of us managed to type much at all. He engaged with me only in terms of professional requirements. It was not a matter of avoidance. It was a measure of self-control. His unwavering self-control sent a shiver down my spine. As I re-entered our home, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee and laundry detergent enveloped me, reminiscent of a well-worn blanket. All things arranged as they should be. He had meticulously vacuumed, carefully folded the towels, and even taken the time to wash my car. I lingered in the kitchen, allowing the familiar routine to envelop me once more, much like a fine layer of dust. He inquired about the outcome of the conference. I responded by recalling the keynote speaker's opening joke, made a remark about the subpar hotel Wi-Fi, and noted that the chicken served at the buffet was rather dry. With a smile and a nod, he poured me a cup of tea, offering it without a word of inquiry. That simple gesture once brought me solace. At that moment, it seemed as though he was adhering to a carefully crafted formula. Recognizable, effective, devoid of taste. As I cradled the cup, my gaze drifted to my own hands, lost in contemplation. Hands that had caressed his chest, that had grasped the edge of his blazer in the corridor. It was more than merely the kiss. In that moment, I was acutely aware of the vibrancy coursing through me, and how lifeless everything seemed now. The arrival of Monday at the office felt all too abrupt. I donned a modest navy dress, unassuming in its elegance, yet beneath it lay a hint of allure with delicate black lace. It is not meant for him. It is not intended for my husband. It simply transformed the way I carried myself, prompting me to sit with more poise, walk with a measured pace, and breathe with a profound depth. As the clock approached noon, I glimpsed my reflection in the polished elevator doors and noticed the change. A tension gripped my jawline, while a newfound brightness illuminated my eyes. A woman glided past me in the corridor, a representative from Human Resources. She cast me a peculiar look and whispered something barely loud enough to catch my ear. "Have you altered your fragrance?" I had not, or perhaps I had. Unseen. Perhaps my aroma had transformed into something synthetic, burdened by hidden truths. I steered clear of him throughout the morning, not through concealment, but by immersing myself in activity, gatherings, conversations, financial documentation. I turned my gaze away from his office, resolute in my decision. Yet I sensed his presence, similar to the warmth radiating from a fire, felt without direct confrontation. As I inadvertently caught sight of him through the glass wall that divided us, I came to the startling realization that he had been observing me all along. He maintained his gaze. I feigned interest in my phone, which vibrated at that very moment. Punctual. A whimsical twist of fate. A note from my husband, contemplating the idea of crafting pasta this evening. Would you prefer a red sauce or a white sauce? I responded in writing, whichever option you find most appealing. Subsequently, it was erased. Then, they typed once more. Red is perfectly acceptable. It seemed utterly ridiculous. Thus, united in marriage. Such kindness, utterly misguided. As the afternoon waned, fatigue settled in, leaving me weary of the ongoing performance. Of exhibiting diligence, maintaining composure, and embodying impenetrability. I shut the office door behind me and let out a slow breath, reclining in my chair, my heels precariously balanced on one toe, caught between on and off. I yearned to experience that sensation once more. Free from blame, not a source of shame. Simply ignite. As the day approached its conclusion, a notification suddenly appeared on my screen. A message from him. Subject: Wednesday strategy review. Could you remain for a moment after class? I would rather navigate this without the entire team present. No smiley face, no concealed significance. It appeared one way, yet I was aware. During dinner, I found myself seated opposite my husband as he deftly twirled spaghetti around his fork, recounting the tale of a client who failed to appear for a meeting. I acknowledged at the appropriate intervals, chuckled softly, and uttered all the words a devoted companion would express. As he extended his hand across the table to grasp mine, I acquiesced willingly. And when he remarked, "You appear somewhat preoccupied this week. Is everything going well at work?" A smile graced my lips. The manner in which women are instructed to smile while deceiving seems more secure than embracing honesty. It's simply bustling. You're familiar with the experience. Later that night, while we stood side by side at the sink, brushing our teeth, he made a playful quip about the image staring back at us in the mirror. I can hardly recall what it was. I chuckled, but it was a fleeting moment. My laughter resonated like a distant memory of a person I once was. As we extinguished the lights and nestled into our sheets, I lingered, anticipating the gradual easing of his breath. Then I gazed upward, fixating on the shadows of the ceiling. I had no plans in mind. I was neither scheming nor fantasizing. Memories came flooding back to me. The pressure of his hand resting on my hip. The stillness that lingers between our inhalations. The flavor of stillness lingers just after the lips part. As slumber began to envelop me, I found myself silently uttering a name in my mind that was not my husband's. Wednesday arrived, enveloped in a languid, oppressive atmosphere that seemed to cling to every surface. The skies hung heavy with clouds, the aroma of coffee clung stubbornly in the office kitchen, and an eerie stillness enveloped the building, amplifying the sound of each phone ring to an almost jarring degree. I found myself arriving ahead of schedule. Not due to any pressing matters at hand, but rather because the anticipation was simply intolerable. When you yearn for something with such fervor, even the quiet can feel overwhelmingly loud. I donned a charcoal gray pencil skirt paired with a delicate ivory silk blouse. Though it offered no revelations, the fabric murmured softly with each movement, and the way it embraced my waist felt like a hidden truth beneath my blazer. I was well aware of how polished I appeared. Expert. Suitable. Yet, the undercurrent thrumming within me suggested a different truth. Each motion I executed, every fleeting look in the mirror was calculated, regulated, deliberate. He remained silent with me throughout that entire morning. Absent from meetings, not casually. Yet, the atmosphere felt distinct. It was not tension. It was the force of gravity. His presence enveloped the room, palpable even when my gaze was elsewhere. I felt it in the subtle shift of my stance, in the quickening of my heartbeat with each echo of his footsteps beyond my door. The day unfolded in languid sequences. I immersed myself in my tasks, replying to emails with an attention to detail that felt excessive, all while my gaze remained fixed on the ticking clock. As the clock struck 5:30, the office gradually started to clear out. The familiar sounds of the day's end drifted through the corridors. Zippers, the gentle thud of laptop lids, Casual farewells shared among colleagues oblivious to the alternate reality I was entering the instant they departed. At 5:47, I found myself in the break room, carefully pouring steaming water into a waiting mug. My hands shook slightly, though I had no reason to be nervous. Or so I told myself. I heard the sound of his office door click shut behind him. My heartbeat shifted. He appeared beside me at the counter without a word. Not close enough to touch, but enough for my body to register his presence. I didn't look at him. He didn't look at me. We just stood there, both focused on the slow swirl of steam rising from our drinks. When we returned to the conference room, it was already dim. Someone had turned off the overheads, leaving only the soft glow from the hallway. He didn't bother to turn them back on. Instead, he opened his laptop and gestured for me to sit beside him, not across. I hesitated for a second, then obeyed. The screen glowed between us, but neither of us focused on it. He clicked through a few slides, said something about performance metrics and shifting deliverables. His voice was even, deliberate. But my brain wasn't processing the words. It was processing the heat between our arms, the way my skirt pulled tighter when I crossed my legs. The faint scent of his cologne I'd come to associate with breathlessness. I answered one of his questions. I don't remember what it was. I just remember my voice sounding thinner than usual and his eyes flicking down to my mouth before returning to the screen. When the last slide passed, we sat in silence. And then, without a single word, he reached across and placed his hand over mine. Not firm, not suggestive, just certain. My breath caught. I didn't move. He didn't speak. I turned my palm upward, lacing my fingers with his. The gesture was so simple, so quiet, but in it lived every unsaid thing between us. Every look, every pause, every breathless second from the hallway in the hotel to this exact moment. Then I did something I hadn't done before. I broke the stillness. I reached up with my free hand and brushed a piece of lint from his shoulder. A nothing gesture, meaningless on its own. But it made him close his eyes for a moment, as if it undid him. "Are you afraid?" he asked softly. His voice didn't tremble. It invited. I didn't answer. Because I was. Not of him, not of what we were doing, but of how easy it had become. I stood slowly, smoothing my skirt as I moved, and walked to the window. The city looked gray and blurred beneath the low clouds. Cars moved like ants below. Lives marching on without hesitation, without knowing what I was becoming. He came up behind me, close, not touching. I could feel the warmth of his breath against the back of my neck, and every hair on my body stood at attention. I closed my eyes. "I think about it," I said, "all the time." It wasn't a confession. It was a surrender. He didn't speak again. He didn't need to. I returned to my desk a few minutes later with a calm that terrified me. I sent one last email, organized a folder I didn't need to touch, and gathered my things with slow precision. When I got home, my husband was on the phone with his sister, laughing about some joke from childhood I never quite understood. I kissed him on the cheek. He didn't pause his conversation. He smiled, held my wrist gently and mouthed, "How was your day?" "Fine," I mouthed back. And that was the scariest part. He left on Friday morning. My husband, a weekend trip with 2 of his college friends. A small fishing cabin they'd been talking about for months. He kissed my forehead before leaving, called me his girl, and told me not to wait up on Sunday. He might stay the extra night. I nodded and smiled, barefoot in the kitchen, wrapping a dish towel around my hand though nothing was wet. As soon as the front door clicked shut, the silence changed. Not emptiness. Openness. Space. Permission. The air felt different, like a stage cleared of props. I stood in the hallway longer than I meant to, listening for sounds that weren't there. No footsteps. No pages turning in the living room. No familiar cough from upstairs. Just me, the ticking clock, and the sound of my own breath beginning to deepen. I didn't plan to see him. Not explicitly. I didn't text him that morning. I cleaned instead. Washed the sheets, opened the windows, scrubbed surfaces that didn't need scrubbing. The act of preparing became its own kind of ritual, not for domestic perfection, but for something else entirely. I shaved my legs slowly, methodically, moisturized every inch of skin. Not like a chore, but like a promise. When I opened my underwear drawer, I didn't hesitate. The dark red lace set I'd bought years ago and worn only once, still wrapped in delicate tissue. I laid it on the bed like it deserved ceremony. After my shower, I dressed in stages. First the lingerie, smooth, fitted, flattering in a way that didn't beg for attention but demanded it. Then the silk wrap, ivory with black piping, the one I usually reserved for Sunday mornings with coffee and novels I rarely finished. I did my makeup not like a woman going out, but like a woman expecting someone to truly look at her. Every stroke of eyeliner, every press of color on my cheeks was precise, not because I wanted to look younger or prettier, but because I wanted to look aware. Awake, I poured myself a glass of wine. White, crisp, barely sweet. The glass sweat in my hand as I sat by the window. I didn't put on music. The silence felt full enough. When I finally messaged him, it was simple. If you're nearby, I made too much coffee. No emoji. No coyness. His response came 20 minutes later, 15 minutes. I didn't feel giddy. I didn't pace. I simply got up and checked the mirror one last time. The hallway felt longer than usual as I walked toward the door. When the bell rang, I didn't hesitate. I opened it. He stood there, wearing a gray coat over a dark sweater, holding nothing. No pretense, no barrier. His eyes scanned me slowly, first my face, then downward, then back up. And he didn't try to hide it. That alone sent heat blooming across my collarbones. I stepped aside. He entered without a word. I closed the door behind him and locked it. Not because I was afraid of being caught, but because I didn't want the air to escape. He didn't touch me at first. We stood across from each other in the living room, the quiet almost unbearable. Then he took a step forward, slow and deliberate, as if waiting for me to flinch. I didn't. He kissed me, and this time there was no restraint, no careful testing of boundaries. It wasn't rushed, but it was real. His hands held my waist like he'd imagined it. My body leaned into his before I even realized I'd moved. I felt the curve of my back arch, my lips part. My breath caught somewhere between need and fear. He pulled away, just enough to look at me. "This is going to get complicated," he said, voice low. "It already is," I replied. We didn't talk more after that. Not because there was nothing to say, but because our bodies were speaking in a language we both understood too well by now. One built on glances, on breath, on skin that remembered touch better than mine's remembered reason. We didn't make love. We didn't even undress. But everything about the moment felt exposed. His hand on the small of my back. My fingers tangled briefly in his hair. The sigh that escaped me when his lips found the edge of my jaw. We moved together like people who'd waited too long and no longer cared what patience looked like. And then he left. Not abruptly, not with guilt. He kissed my shoulder, whispered nothing, and let himself out. I watched his car pull away from the window, glass still sweating in my hand, the second half of the wine untouched. Later that night, I climbed into bed in the same lingerie, untouched by anyone else. I didn't change. I didn't want to. I lay awake listening to the wind tap against the window. The sheets were clean. The house smelled like lemon cleaner and heat, and I realized I wasn't waiting anymore. I was wanting. All the time, constantly. Not just him, but the version of myself I had just met. He didn't call the next day, and I didn't message either. I spent Saturday walking through town with sunglasses on, pretending to browse window displays I'd seen 100 times. The late autumn light made everything seem softer, blurred at the edges. My reflection in the glass storefronts caught me off guard more than once. Not because I looked different, but because I looked aware. That was the only word I could find for it. I walked as if the world could feel the warmth that still lingered on my skin, even if no one else could see it. Back home, I folded laundry with slow precision, holding each shirt and pair of jeans as if I were taking inventory of a life that had quietly rearranged itself. The house was silent again, but no longer in that spacious, alive way. This silence was something else. A waiting room. A pause before impact. On Sunday evening, just after dusk, my husband called from the cabin. I answered on the second ring, letting my breath steady before I spoke. He told me the fishing was terrible, that one of the guys had brought the wrong size reels and spent 2 hours arguing about it. I laughed when I was supposed to. He said they were staying one more night, leaving early Monday morning. His voice was familiar, gentle, warm. And for the first time, I felt something colder than guilt. I felt absence, not his, mine. When I hung up, I stood in the kitchen for a long time, hands on the counter, eyes fixed on the bowl of lemons I had no intention of using. The moment felt suspended in air, like the pause between a question and the answer that ruins everything. Monday came with gray skies and air heavy with static. He returned home mid-morning, dropped his duffel bag in the entryway, and kissed me like nothing had changed. I kissed him back, mechanically, my mind distracted by the fact that I still smelled his cologne on my robe from 2 days ago and hadn't bothered to wash it. He unpacked slowly, humming to himself. I watched him from the hallway, the slope of his shoulders, the way he lined up his toiletries in a neat row along the bathroom shelf. Everything about him was clean, predictable, safe. That night, he made a reservation at a new Mediterranean place across town. Said we hadn't had a proper dinner out in weeks. He wore the blue button-down I liked. Complimented my dress. I wore a muted green wrap, soft wool, elegant. Underneath, nothing but a pale gold bodysuit with lace trim. I couldn't explain why. Maybe I wanted to feel something again. Maybe I just wanted to test whether he'd noticed the difference in how I moved. He didn't. He told me about a new project at work, how he'd been offered a lead role. He asked how things were on my end. I said the week had been busy. Smiled, took a sip of my wine. The lie felt like a coat I slipped on without thought. When we got home, he lit a candle in the bedroom, a rare gesture, something he used to do in our first years together. I lay on the bed and watched him undress, with the vague detachment of someone observing a ritual they no longer believed in. He touched me with practiced kindness, kissed my shoulder, my neck, whispered that I was beautiful. But my body did not react the way I hoped it would. My skin didn't spark under his fingers. My breath didn't change. I tried. I wanted to want him, but what I felt wasn't discomfort. It wasn't pain. It was absence. I had disappeared from the room even though I lay beneath him. And then came the moment that broke me in a way I hadn't expected. His hand found the clasp of my bodysuit. He smiled, clumsy and sweet. "New?" he asked, teasing gently. I nodded. And all I could think about was how someone else would have never asked. Would have never needed to. I let it happen. I didn't stop him. But I felt nothing. My body moved as it should. Responded where it was expected to, but inside I was gone. I had taken the part of myself that felt, that ached, and locked it behind the memory of a man who never had to ask if I was new. Afterward, I lay beside him in silence. He drifted off quickly, breathing slow and heavy, arm draped lazily across my waist. I stared at the ceiling at the soft flicker of the candle against the walls. And I realized I hadn't said a single word during the entire time we were together. Not out loud, at least. But inside me, thoughts were screaming. Not for answers. Not for absolution. Just to be seen. I rose carefully from the bed, wrapped myself in a blanket and sat by the window. Outside, the street was quiet. A couple walked their dog past the gate. Their laughter drifted upward, distant and thin. I checked my phone, no messages. I told myself that was a good thing. And yet, I waited. I've never been good at hiding anticipation. Even when my face was calm, my body always betrayed me. A quicker step, a tighter grip on my bag. A breath held too long. And when I stepped into the building that evening and took the elevator up to the 13th floor, I felt every inch of myself become aware again. I was heading into a space where the air wasn't just air, but a mix of tension, memory, and something I no longer had the strength or will to resist. There was a company celebration that night. One of those awkward, half-hearted events with plastic wine glasses, overcooked hors d'oeuvres, and forced small talk. I'd always hated them. The pretending, the empty laughter, the lingering smell of catered food and paper napkins. We were all acting out some version of belonging, connection, community. I didn't belong to any of it. I arrived late on purpose. The room was already full, music low, chatter high, glasses clinking, people leaning toward each other with exaggerated smiles. He stood by the far wall, wine glass in hand, talking to someone from logistics. I felt his eyes on me before I even saw him, that invisible gravity pulling my shoulders back, tightening my spine, heating my chest. I wore a midnight blue dress. Not overtly provocative, but cut low in the back, clinging in ways that didn't scream, but whispered. It slid over my hips like liquid. When I caught him looking at me, really looking, I knew he was reading every line of it. But I didn't approach him. I made my rounds, greeted a few familiar faces, held a glass I barely sipped from. Every movement was calculated without being conscious. How I tilted my head when I laughed, the exact angle I crossed my legs, the way I let the strap of my purse fall slightly down my arm. I wasn't playing a part. I was inhabiting something. 15 minutes later, he came to stand beside me. No greeting, no smile. Just his presence, unmistakable and close enough to feel the warmth radiating off his sleeve. He didn't speak, but he didn't need to. "You're glowing," someone commented as they passed. A woman from HR. "Like you're keeping a secret." Neither of us responded. The room suddenly felt too loud, too bright. I needed air. I slipped through the side door and stepped onto the balcony. The cold hit me like a wall. It was sharp, honest. I leaned against the railing and looked out over the city, a blur of headlights and motion detached from everything still burning beneath my skin. He followed. I knew he would. The door closed behind him without sound. "You're cold," he said softly. He didn't offer his coat. He didn't touch me. He just stood beside me, close enough that I could feel the warmth between us growing like a storm. "I shouldn't have come," I said quietly. "But you did." I didn't answer. We stood there in silence for a long time. The kind of silence that says more than any conversation could. I stared straight ahead, letting the chill numb the exposed skin on my back. My heels ached. My fingers trembled slightly, but I didn't move. He reached for my hand. Gently, slowly, not demanding, not possessive. As if he was asking a question with his fingers. I let him take it. His palm was warm, solid, comforting in a way that wasn't safe, but true. "Have you ever been happy?" he asked after a pause. I couldn't answer. The question was too sharp, too bare. My silence was the only honest thing I could offer. He turned my hand over in his, lifted it slightly, and pressed it to his chest. I felt his heartbeat. Fast, uneven, real. "Does it feel right here?" he asked, voice nearly a whisper. I didn't respond. I didn't nod. But I didn't pull away. We stood like that, not touching in any other place, yet completely connected. The tension in my body didn't come from fear. It came from recognition. From knowing that if I leaned even a little closer, I wouldn't be able to come back from it. I was the one who stepped away first. I turned from him slowly, walked past without looking back, and just before reaching the door, I spoke. "I need to leave. And not because I want to." He didn't follow. But I knew this wasn't the end. Not for him, not for me. The next morning felt heavier than it should have. I woke to the usual rhythm, the hum of the kettle downstairs, the scrape of a chair being pulled out, the sound of a spoon against porcelain. My husband was already dressed, reading something on his phone, coffee in hand. He smiled when I walked in. Not the kind of smile that searches your eyes or studies your face. Just a gentle, familiar curve of the mouth that said, "I see you." But not deeply. "Sleep okay?" he asked. Fine, I replied. He went back to scrolling. I sat across from him and buttered toast I didn't want, nodding in all the right places as he talked about a neighbor's new dog or a sale at the hardware store. His voice was soft, measured, easy. Everything in our home was soft, measured, easy. The floors gleamed. The air was warm. The walls were filled with photos of us on vacations, smiling on boats, standing in front of mountains. But I couldn't stop thinking about the man who hadn't followed me, not because he should have, but because I wanted him to. At work, the day crawled. My inbox filled with routine messages. I typed responses with the detachment of a machine. When he passed my desk in the late morning, he didn't pause. He didn't glance. He spoke to someone behind me. His voice was even, professional, almost distant. I stared at the cursor blinking on my screen and felt a strange hollowness in my chest. The kind that doesn't come from loss, but from uncertainty. From not knowing what anything meant anymore. By lunch, I was restless. I stepped outside for air. The city was colder than it looked. I wrapped my coat tighter and wandered a few blocks without direction. My legs moved, but my thoughts didn't. I felt like I was floating above myself, watching a woman play a part she no longer remembered auditioning for. I didn't see him again that day, nor the next. He wasn't avoiding me, I knew that. It wasn't about strategy or punishment. It was something quieter, more restrained. Like two people circling the edge of something sharp, afraid that one more step might make it real. At home, things were normal. My husband cooked pasta one night, oversalted it, and made a joke about how he was no competition for my favorite restaurant downtown. I laughed politely, refilled our wine glasses, and sat beside him on the couch while we watched a show I couldn't follow. He tried to pull me closer halfway through the episode. I let him. I rested my head against his shoulder. He kissed my hair, but inside, I was somewhere else. Not with the other man. Not exactly, but with the version of myself that came alive when I wasn't trying to be someone's wife. That version of me had stopped asking for permission. And yet, here I was, shrinking again. Quiet again. Controlled. Friday evening, after another long week of acting normal, I left the office early. Told my husband I had errands. But instead of the grocery store, I drove to the edge of the city, to a quiet park near the river where no one went this time of year. The air was damp. The sky a dull sheet of gray. I sat on a bench facing the water, wrapped in my coat, and tried to feel the cold. I needed to be alone. I needed the ache. Everything inside me felt stretched, thin, like a string pulled too tight. I didn't want to cry. There were no tears, just that slow internal unraveling, thread by thread, as the questions mounted in silence. Who was I becoming? What did I want? Was this still a secret? If it had begun to change me? I heard footsteps before I saw him. They were distant, slow, cautious. I didn't turn. I kept my eyes on the water, the bare branches swaying above it. He stood a few feet away. I thought you left early, he said. I did. You didn't answer your messages. I didn't read them. Silence. A beat, too. I didn't know where else you'd go. That was the moment I broke, not from guilt, but from recognition. He knew. Without asking, without explanation. I looked at him finally. His expression was unreadable, not cold, not angry, just still. Why are we doing this? I asked. Not accusatory, just honest. His voice came low, calm, almost broken. Because when I look at you, I remember what wanting feels like. I closed my eyes. I hadn't realized how much I needed someone to say that. Not love, not forever, just that simple, terrible truth. Wanting. I didn't move. I didn't answer. And I didn't ask him to sit beside me. But he did, without waiting. The kitchen smelled like rosemary. It always did when he roasted potatoes the way I liked. Crisp on the outside. Soft inside. Salted just right. He moved between drawers with quiet efficiency. Humming under his breath. Wearing the apron I'd bought him 2 Christmases ago. It had a dumb phrase on it. Something about being the grill master. But he wore it anyway, always had. He never minded looking foolish for me. We hadn't spoken much that day. Nothing felt off. No tension. Just the kind of silence that fills a home when both people believe they know everything about each other. But that night, as we sat down at the table, he poured me a glass of wine before serving himself. He took a bite, nodded at the food like he always did, not for approval, but out of habit, and then said something that stopped the air in my chest. "I've been watching you," he said. "The past few weeks." I froze. My hand tightened around the stem of the glass, but I kept my expression still. Not neutral. Still. I didn't speak. I couldn't trust my voice. "I don't mean anything dramatic," he continued. "Just little things. You're quieter. You touch me less. You look away more. Not in anger. Just like you're somewhere else." The room didn't feel hot, but I felt heat rise along my collarbone, spreading upward, flushing my neck. I reached for the salt, though the food didn't need it. Though I didn't need it. I just needed something to do with my hands. He didn't sound accusatory. There was no sharpness in his tone. Just observation. Like someone describing weather patterns. Facts, not feelings. "I saw how you looked at him once," he added, "in the hallway." Now I looked at him. Not with panic, not denial. I just met his eyes and waited for what would come next. He didn't ask a question, didn't name names, didn't throw words like betrayal or mistake across the table like daggers. He simply set his fork down, exhaled, and stared at the candle between us. The flame flickered. "I don't want to know anything," he said. I just needed to say it out loud, and with that, the subject dissolved. He continued eating, and I sat there, tasting nothing. Later that night, after the dishes were done and the house returned to its usual hush, I stood in front of the mirror, brushing my hair. He came up behind me, placed his hands gently on my shoulders, and met my gaze in the reflection. His eyes were soft, tired. He kissed the back of my head, then turned and went to bed without another word. I stood there long after the lights in the bedroom dimmed, my brush still in hand. My reflection not quite familiar. I wasn't crying. I wasn't angry. I just felt the quiet take up residence in my chest like it had been invited. The next morning, at work, I walked past his office. He looked up from his desk. Our eyes met, and for the first time, there was no pull. Just silence. The kind of silence that follows a final page in a book. He didn't smile. I didn't stop. I sat down at my desk, opened my laptop, and stared at the blinking cursor. My phone buzzed once. A message from my husband. Just 2 words. "Dinner tonight?" I replied, "Yes." And that was it. No grand endings. No storms. No collisions. Just quiet choices, one after another. But deep down, beneath the layers of routine and restraint, I carried something heavier than guilt and sharper than regret. I carried the memory of a version of myself that had surfaced only briefly and disappeared without warning, and I wasn't sure if I missed him more or her.